All right. Today, we are diving into the incredible story of Ulia Vaughn. She's a former CFO who treated her family like her most important long-term investment. But what happens when that investment gives you nothing back, except betrayal? Well, as a top-tier executive, she did what any good CFO would do. She liquidated the asset, and she did it with absolutely devastating precision.
We gave your ticket to my mom. The grandkids love her more. Just let those words sink in for a second. These are the words that kick this whole thing off. And get this, they were spoken by Eulalia's daughter-in-law, Valencia, right at the airport check-in counter. They were all about to leave for a luxury trip to the Maldives, a trip Eulalia had planned down to the last detail and paid for, completely.
So let's set the stage here. Our story starts with an unbelievably generous gift, which then spirals into a just stunningly public betrayal.
Look, this wasn't just any old vacation. For her 65th birthday, Eulalia decided to pour a huge amount of money into making family memories. We're talking about a private resort in the Maldives, business class for everyone, an overwater villa with its own pool, the whole shebang. This was supposed to be a legacy gift.
But right from the moment they got to the airport, something was off. The atmosphere was just thick with tension. Her son, Sterling, wouldn't even look her in the eye, and her daughter-in-law, Valencia, was huddled in the corner whispering with her own mother, Odessa, who just happened to show up with a giant suitcase. Eulalia's years of assessing risk were screaming at her. She knew it in her gut. The deal was dirty.
And then it happens, right there at the check-in desk. The agent asks for the passports, and before Eulalia can even move, Valencia steps in front of her and hands over her mother Odessa's passport instead of Eulalia's. The ticket was stolen, right there in plain sight.
Now you'd expect yelling, right? A huge public scene? Nope. Eulalia's reaction wasn't emotional at all. It was pure executive. She calmly handed over all the travel documents, the resort vouchers, looked them in the eye and said, "Have a good flight," and then she just walked away. In her mind, the deal was over. The account was closed.
But make no mistake, Eulalia walking away from that counter wasn't a retreat. Oh no, it was the beginning of her counter move. It was time to launch a pre-planned, devastatingly precise financial strike that she called the Golden Parachute.
So, from a quiet corner in the airport terminal, Eulalia made a single phone call to her personal banker. She only had to say 2 words: initiate the protocol. See, this wasn't some impulsive act of anger. This was the activation of a financial contingency plan, her golden parachute, designed for exactly this kind of worst-case scenario.
And this protocol? It was absolutely ruthless. In just a few minutes, her son and daughter-in-law's credit card limits were slashed from unlimited down to 0. Then, she disputed the massive $25,000 prepayment for the resort, revoking the bank's guarantee while their plane was literally still on the runway.
The fallout was immediate. Picture this. They're at 30,000 feet, and Sterling tries to order a celebratory bottle of champagne. Card declined. Confused, Valencia pulls out her backup card. Declined. They're sitting there, completely confused and embarrassed, with absolutely no idea that their entire financial reality had just been wiped clean. So, while they were flying high toward their stolen paradise, Eulalia was already making sure it would be anything but. Let's get into how their dream vacation completely unraveled into an absolute nightmare the second they landed.
Their paradise just fell apart with breathtaking speed. They land, expecting a private boat transfer, only to be told their reservation is canceled. Within hours, they're not just denied check-in, they're literally kicked out of the resort lobby and left stranded on a public beach, totally penniless.
The difference between what they expected and what they got is just wow. Instead of that luxury villa, the best they were offered was a room next to a noisy generator for $3,000 a night, which they had to pay up front. Without Eulalia, they weren't special guests anymore. They were just, and I quote, regular guests off the street with no cash. Their first dinner in paradise? Instant noodles in some cheap motel.
And this financial takedown wasn't just about the vacation. Oh no. Back in Atlanta, Eulalia had her lawyer start selling the 2 main pillars of her son's lifestyle: his fancy Midtown office and his big black Escalade. And the kicker? Both were legally in her name. She was pulling the plug on everything.
So, now they're facing complete financial ruin, thousands of miles from home. What's their last desperate move? They decide to take the fight public. But Eulalia, the CFO, was ready for that too. Valencia posts this tearful video called Monster Instead of Grandma.
It's a total emotional plea, accusing Eulalia of abandoning them, even using the kids as props. But Eulalia's response, which she titled The Expense Report, was a masterclass. It was just cold, hard facts, bank statements, airport security footage of the actual ticket theft, and even proof that Valencia had siphoned $4,000 from her own children's college fund. Public opinion? It flipped on a dime.
Okay, so after the financial takedown and the public relations war, what was the final outcome? Let's take a look at the final balance sheet for everyone involved in this mess.
Well, Eulalia liquidated her old life and invested in a new one. She joined a travel club and is living it up. Sterling and Valencia, they're now facing the real-world consequences, working regular jobs and just drowning in debt. And Odessa, in a final perfect act of selfishness, she took whatever money was left, abandoned her own family, and booked herself a spa day. It really seems like everyone got exactly what they had coming to them.
For Eulalia, you have to understand, this all came down to a simple calculation. Over the last decade, she had invested $2 million into her son's family. The return on that investment? Zero. In the world of finance, the decision is crystal clear. When an asset consistently loses money, you cut your losses and you move on.
You know, in a strange way, maybe the most valuable thing Eulalia ever gave her son wasn't all that money. Maybe it was a massive dose of reality. For the very first time in their lives, Sterling and Valencia were forced to be financially independent, to live their own lives without her safety net.
But this story leaves us with a really big question, doesn't it? Was Eulalia's response a masterclass in setting boundaries, a form of cold, calculated justice for years of being taken for granted? Or was it a cruel and excessive act of revenge, especially since there were kids involved? Where do you draw that line? That's what I'll leave you to think about.